Sue Mead has traveled to 74 countries and counting, is an author, an adventurer, a racer, and an me, whatever that means. Well, you'll find out shortly. Without further ado, meet my dear new friend, Sue Mead. Sue Mead, Dakar driver, racer, writer, adventurer. You're here in the vault. This is probably the closest media bit you've done in years.
I feel like I'm in a sacred bubble. This is great.
Well, then we're doing something A-okay. We're doing some. I often say it's a bit like an operational pause to life, an adult timeout, that we just kind of escape and hold some space. So the podcast, My Story Vault, is all about tracing back in time in a way that doesn't put any pressure on you as a guest. That would be so unfair, but that helps our audience and people around the world, whether they're younger folks or folks in transition, understand how to make sense of their lives as it relates to work. So sometimes in the vault, we find treasures, right?
I like that.
Yeah, cool. And I'm guessing we're going to find a few today through our conversation. So thanks for making the time, because I know you've been to how many countries?
74.
74 countries. And you didn't start off saying you were going to race the Dakar race.
Never.
Which, could you explain to people who might not understand, the non-automotive enthusiast, what this race is about?
Well, it's called just simply the Dakar at times by people. It's one of the top 5 adventures on the planet, and it's an automotive off-road race. It's taken place, it started in Paris and ran to Africa, Dakar, Senegal, which was how it developed its namesake. But it has moved from that initial route in 1981 through a number of African countries and then to South America, where I had the good fortune of being in a Ford Raptor and being the last vehicle standing in my class. So
you won it.
I won my class.
You won your class in 2011. That wasn't that long ago, really.
No, it is certainly one of the top highlights of my life, but I had done my first Dakar in 2000.
Okay.
And as what they call co-pilot or co-driver, and wanted to go back and be the driver of record. And I never dreamed that 10 years later, things would fall into place. I kind of nudged them a bit, but that it would give me the opportunity to champion the Ford Raptor. It was brand new then, and to be able to put together a race team.
Now, for non-Ford aficionados,
yes,
the Ford Raptor is like essentially a pickup truck that would be like in a video game. It was that scary fast.
It was and still is. It's in its 6th generation now.
Wow.
But I think what's important to know about it, and the Dakar also, for the Ford Raptor, it changed history of what pickup trucks could be. And many other automakers spawned similar versions that were very high-powered and had the talent to drive to the country club and look cool, or also go out to the racetrack. And to just clarify for a moment, the Dakar Rally is 6,000 miles long.
Oh my gosh.
And
so for folks saying, sometimes I have to commute to Boston from the Berkshires. It's like a really long drive. You say, what? No. Come on.
Yeah, find something to do when you're at 6,000 miles. And it is made up of race segments as well as transit segments. So in a transit, you're moving from the race camp to the place where you begin racing, unless you're in the middle of the desert, which we were a number of times, and you just start from that point forward. But in total, it was 10,000 miles. And the year that I was successful in being a winner, we started in Buenos Aires, Argentina at sea level and went over the spine of the Andes with snow above 14,000 feet, and then went down to Chile, and we were at sea level again. And we transited through the Atacama Desert, which is the world's highest desert, 11,000 feet. So doing the Dakar Rally requires a lot of stamina and skill, and it's not really for the faint of heart, but I would encourage anyone that has the desire to learn about off-road racing and going into deserts. It's just one of the most alive places in the world.
So what strikes me about even what you're sharing at the onset of our conversation is that you have become a historian, a journalist through this, even prior to this. You clearly have a vast knowledge of geography, right? And climate, an understanding of climate across just different geographic zones. I mean, I'm almost like struck silent by how much data information you just tossed our way.
Well, thank you for saying that, because one of the things I love about off-road racing is where it takes me into the Baja of Mexico, into the deserts of Morocco. I like the terrain and the places, and there's many, I use the word sacred before, many sacred spaces and deserts. But also the skill set requires knowing a bit about the vehicle that you're competing in. Also, having some degree of stamina. When I won my Dakar, I was 60 years old. 60, yes.
So for those folks thinking, hey, it's too late to do a career change.
Oh, good Lord, no. Absolutely not. There are people now that are in their 60s and 70s that are there on motorcycles and competing in high-level classes. It requires more mental stamina than it does necessarily physical fitness. Thank goodness that helped me. But also, it requires having a degree of knowledge about safety and how to take care of people should you have an accident or you get lost in the middle of the night and you find yourself literally in the middle of nowhere. Doesn't happen very much because the cars are now tagged and we are watched at all times to some degree.
Okay. But when you started, none of that extra technology was placed onto the cars or the trucks.
No. And when my first Dakar across North Africa, there were landmines that were unexploded in the ground. And so
Did you have to sign off on that at all, or?
To your family at home.
Yeah.
But you had to have knowledge of navigation and not just go crazily through the desert. It's very appealing.
So very discerning, I would say, too, right? A lot of analysis, a lot of thinking, a lot of spatial intelligence. And here's where I go, whoa, where did this all begin? Like now, right? Like, how did you play as a kid? What were the things that were going on in Sue Mead's world that led her to this place? And as you know, and we spoke about this when we were on the hill taking pictures of that Dakar tribute that will probably appear online as grab shots of you and me hanging out before all of the spring has sprung in the Berkshires in the background. You know that I care about guidance of students, and I know you do too. And sometimes the guidance that we give students and the career transition for adults, whether it's at 60 or 36 or 46, is a you should, here's what I see in you, therefore I am making the recommendation, I'm writing the script that you should go do this, right? Someone's good with language, you should go be a lawyer. You like to fight a little bit, you should be a litigator, right? You, as I understand it, didn't have people tell you to go do this because of a skill. They said, if you don't do this, you're actually not going to have as much of a fruitful future, right? So can you take us back to maybe some of what you, in our pre-pod chat, you kind of sprinkled my way about your early days? You're a farm girl a little bit, right?
My mom was a farm girl, and she passed that on to me, but she also went on to get 2 master's degrees, and she was very limiting of television and insisted that my brother and I read National Geographics. And who knew that my life as an adult would include driving through the pages of National Geographic.
So your mom encouraged you to read National Geographic. It's funny how I was really thinking about how did you play? And then I asked a couple of more questions, made a couple of more statements, right? And then all of a sudden we end up on National. That's how you played. You read a little bit.
I was forced to read more than I wanted to at that time because what's fascinating for me is that I have fallen in love with deserts and nature and vehicles that go fast. And I grew up just wanting to be in the out of doors. And my brother, who was a year younger, was always kind of an older brother to me. And psychologically,
despite being a year younger.
Yes, he was always pushing me. And I didn't mind the pushing, but he would make me ride my bike too fast down the hills where we grew up in Lenox on the back roads. And I grew to love the feeling of wind in my hair. And I would ride my bicycle so fast. And then we would just spend a lot of time in the out of doors, fishing, catching frogs. We lived near a wildlife sanctuary, going on the trails legally and illegally. We just really were adventurers. And when we were in our teens, he found a very small motorcycle, and it was immediately ours. I don't even know how he got it. I don't want to know how he got it, but he would encourage me to ride it up some of the mountains. And I remember getting to the top of the mountain, which I've always loved going up. But then I would panic about going down, and I would turn it off and just ride the brakes down. I was so afraid. So I lost my brother when I was 22 and he was 21. I often feel I carry him in my backpack. I carry his spirit. And it took a long time to get over the loss of him because he was so profound in my life. And then I realized—
It was a sudden loss.
It was. And I realized that the wellspring of my adventuring probably came from my brother. And so I bring him with me in the jungles of Belize or in the mud of Borneo or into the huts in Mongolia. And yet my mom, who grew up as a farm girl but really cherished things intellectual. And I was a good learner. I was a good student, but I was also, and it's funny, I was called a tomboy, or I call myself a tomboy. We just don't even use that word anymore. But I was a bit of a cut up in school because I was bored. It took me a long time to figure out why I did that.
Is that because you were so physical, like you're moving around? Like sometimes folks who study intelligence for a living will call that like bodily intelligence, right? Or kinesthetic intelligence, that, you like to move and be around sort of more physical activities? Or was it because your mind just left the building as an explorer, adventurer, and if you weren't engaged, you were going to create engagement through imagination or something like that? That's
beautiful.
Spitballing here. Okay.
Yeah, that's great because I think it was a combination of both.
Okay.
And I'm kind of fast forwarding through a couple of things, like leaving home at the age of 16 and landing up in Washington, D.C.
Apply the brakes. Whoa. What happened? So we skipped. So you lost your brother when you were...
But it was 22.
22. He was 21. But prior to that, so this is the trace back, right? When I told you you drive fast quickly, in conversation, we're going to yank that brake up a little bit once in a while. So you went to D.C. at 16?
I did.
You said you lived there.
I lived there for a few years, but I lived there for my senior year of high school.
Okay.
And I literally had tears streaming down my face all the way in the back of I think it felt like a woody wagon that the woman who was my benefactor, let's say,
Okay.
wanted.
So she was like a host family kind of thing?
Well, yes.
Okay.
And she had met me and I did some babysitting for her children, and she loved my adventuring. We were at that time in Plymouth, Mass, and I would take them out to the spit of land and build fires and do really fun, festive things with them.
So how did you connect with the woman from DC? Where is it just like a little job, a little
It started,
learning
my mom met
journey?
her,
Okay.
and when her son was playing baseball, and my brother likewise, and my mom said, I have a daughter who'd love to babysit for you, and then told me this was going to happen. And I was furious because she signed me up for things all the time. She made me be a candy striper, served me well later. She made me do these things, and she said, you're going to be babysitting for this woman named Muffy. And I was really unhappy. And the next thing...
But compliant nonetheless.
Well, I
kind of
felt like I didn't have... I knew it was an out, and I knew that she lived on a beautiful promontory overlooking the ocean and the beach.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, that might be cool. And she was very bright and just a fabulous person. And the next thing I knew, over the next 2 years, I think I was 14 when we met, she brought me with her family skiing in Montreal and Laurentians, and brought me to Ponte Vedra, Florida, so I could play with her children. And
so you would travel with the family
on vacations, and she was very kind to me, very bright, and she had an extremely important life. She was married to... This is really funny because she was married to Eric Wentworth, who was one of the Washington Post reporters. And I had no idea that I would go on to be a news journalist. There were so many crazy things.
So Wentworth, the reporter.
Right.
In DC. Okay. At this point, you didn't really know a lot about his work when you first met her?
No, he was very kind. They were separating, and he was very kind to me, as I said, as was she. And so it was, as I was approaching the summer before my senior year of high school, she sensed that I was in some personal struggle, and I hadn't really worn my heart on my sleeve with her.
How did she sense that?
Oh, I think she knew I'd been tearful before I showed up for work. She saw that I was distressed, and I said that my family was divorcing and that my parents were fighting. One was going to Lenox, the other was going to Connecticut, and I wanted to go neither place. And I was the oldest of, at that point, 3 brothers now. And I knew that there was no good way forward. And when I spilled the beans and told her, she said very quickly, you're coming to Washington, D.C. with me. And that's where she lived, next to the Washington Cathedral. And you're coming to Washington, D.C. with me. I'm going to get you into high school, and you will go there. And as I said, tears ran down my face all the way to D.C. And then I think they dried very quickly. I was given a Honda 50 motorcycle or motorbike to ride to school.
Was it one of the red and white ones with the little, had white, almost like shin guards, the flares that came out of the side?
It did have the flares that came out of the side,
I think that's right. That's my memory serves me anyway.
One of those little, almost like Vespa lights.
Yeah, very Vespa-like.
Yes. And again, I wasn't a car girl, but I loved that freedom. And what I did in return was...
Wait. Like the freedom that you experienced with your brother.
I hadn't thought about that. I love the freedom of having this.
Right? Your brother gave you that, who knows how he got it, motorbike that you zipped up hills with.
Exactly. Which I did go back and bring to DC from New England. It was left there, and that became such a keepsake for me. But there was something you said that you asked me if I was sometimes wanting to be outside of the classroom walls.
Yes, that's right.
And
Thank you for bringing us back to that.
And I had all this to insert, But I started skipping school my senior year of high school toward the end of the year because it was so gorgeous. And
So this is in D.C.
in D.C.
So your final year of high school was in D.C.
It was at Woodrow
Okay.
Wilson High School. And I would ride my motorbike, little bike to school. And even in the winter when I could, and I'd have to pry my hands open because it would be so cold when I would do that to get a pencil in. But what was a really important moment for me was that I got caught skipping.
Oh.
And
who caught you?
The dean of students, someone
Okay.
reported that I wasn't showing up for my last study class and maybe some French classes. And I love French, but I just wanted to go. I didn't do it all the time. I wanted to go ride my motorcycle down by the memorials in Washington, D.C. And so when I got called in to the dean of students,
Gosh.
I told her, and she was trying not to smile. You did what? What were you doing? Oh, okay. And I said, you want me to tell you about the memorials and what I've learned? And she said, no, but you have to bring your guardian, Muffy, in with you to get back into school.
Okay.
And you're going to suffer 3 days of no school. And I went home and told Muffy.
And you went back on the scooter and went back to the Smithsonian at that point, right?
Oh, my goodness. And I went home, and another really important lesson learned. Muffy said, who was paying for me to go to school there and was very generous in supporting me and just using me to take care of her 3 children and take them on outings individually and sometimes together. And I would bring them down in her car to the memorials.
I love the way you use that phrase, outings.
Oh, I didn't think of even saying that.
Yeah, like everything you do is an outing.
That's, I think, what she really enjoyed about me. And I remember taking them to the reflecting pool and sailing sailboats, little boats that we would make. And it's so funny. I remember with my brother making acorn sailboats with the way that you can do with little tree pieces. So it was very adventuresome and fun. And she was very good to me. But when I was out of school, when I was suspended was the word.
Okay.
She said, you got yourself into it, and there is no way that I'm coming to get you back in. You'll get yourself back in. And it was stinging. It was like horseradish up my nose. I said,
you just expected the support.
I did. And she was, as I said, she was very, very loving to me. But she said, you did this, you get yourself back in. So there were a couple of other friends who had done similar things. And I think sometimes I would meet a couple of girls that would sometimes go off campus. But so a couple other people had to go back in with their parents. And I had to go in by myself. And again, this guidance counselor smiled. She said, okay, so I get that. What do you have to say for yourself? And I said, well, I don't really remember, except I'm sure I said that I would make it through the rest of the year and not do that. But
so you recommitted?
I recommitted. But I think that my brain was already trying to figure out what I was going to do. Muffy really wanted me to go to college, and she had set it up for me to interview at 2 very good schools and told me she'd pay for it.
Wow.
And
well, that's not an offer we hear very frequently
no,
these days.
Bard and Bennington. She thought that she knew enough to know that I was more that material,
Okay.
I don't know if it would be fair to say a little hippie, but I went to each, and
so you did a campus visit just to explore a little bit. Okay.
And then I really became distressed, and I realized that I didn't really want to go to school the next year.
This is at a time when, certainly gap years weren't thought of as being a good idea.
They were certainly not suggested, especially when someone was going to pay for it. And my family had fallen apart, and I wanted her respect, and she deserved that. But I became really almost frightened with the notion that I was going to, I think I use this word with you, sort of pattern myself after other expectations.
Such a perfect word.
And I thought,
pattern yourself.
I can't. And then
you remember that identification point in your thinking where you say, I can't pattern myself.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not you thought about that when you were a kid, but when you recalled it, when we chatted earlier, you did say that it was patterned.
Yes.
Okay.
You know what's interesting, Dennis, is that there were some stages in my early years where I wanted to be Kathy, who was a cheerleader and had white sneakers. They were always white, and I was fascinated by that. And also dated Timmy, who was on the football team, and wore a little
Which
cross.
is a modern day Brad now, from what I understand,
Yes.
based on other generations. But yes, I understand. So there was a pattern, an expectation. You felt like you didn't really fit or want.
Oh, there were periods of time growing up where I'd look at other people and have envy about the white sneakers, always clean, or about the boyfriend, or that little cross that was always so perfect. And then she was a lovely person, but I realized it came at a cost, and that I liked getting my sneakers dirty, or I wasn't going to have the life I wanted if my sneakers didn't get dirty. And so I think I began to just look around and think about different things. And likewise with Muffy, it was really frightening, but it was certainly brave to realize how much I felt I owed her, but to also take the risk to say, I can't.
So you had to muster up the courage and the words to say, Muffy, no go.
Mm-hmm.
How did that go? The no go.
She was disappointed in me.
Did she say that? She was disappointed in you?
She did. She let me know she was disappointed. And
didn't treat you the same?
I don't remember that it was much
How did she
different.
let you know then?
Because
just words?
She said, in other words, this offer goes away now. And that was a little frightening as well, because I didn't have the money to go to college.
Did you think, maybe I should undo the no?
No, not for a moment.
Not for a moment.
Not for a moment.
No regrets.
Good Lord, no. It took me a long time.
Good Lord, no. Boy, is that affirmative. Good Lord, no. I felt like I was at a Southern Baptist church just now. Okay. So good Lord, no. And tell us why.
Yeah.
How did that no create more yeses?
Well,
yes, I like this. Yes, I have autonomy, self-determination to do that. I have choice.
I knew that I needed to figure out a lot. And if I went to college right away, it was going to be figured out for me. It was going to be dictated that I do courses of study. And
oh, you look like you just ate something sour.
I know. and that I wanted to choose more about what I learned and how I learned it. And I wanted to learn it more from the world. I was still learning, driving through the cathedral grounds on my little bike and learning so much about the Washington Cathedral. And I was just but I realized, yikes, I don't have money. And what am I going to do? And I left that little scooter behind. I went home for the summer and took some classes at BCC, and then grabbed the other motorcycle. And I don't even remember. I didn't drive it back to DC. I don't remember, honestly, how I got it back to DC. But
probably a pickup truck, I would imagine. Hopefully not a station wagon, but you never know. You never know. A little leaky gas in the back of the Woody, who knows?
But I had heard that a flower shop that was the largest in the country, Johnson's Flower Center in Washington, D.C., hired young people. Okay. And the husband and wife that owned it, say I came in on the motorcycle with no shoes on. That is not true. And
would you have sandals on?
I must have had sandals. I know I had sandals on.
Virtually no shoes. So, yeah.
That's what they thought.
Okay.
And I knew I needed to get a job, and I found a couple of girlfriends from school, one in particular that I room shared with who wasn't able to go to college. And I just began to make my way. And it was really, those were some really glorious years. I've had a lot of glorious years. Those are some really glorious years.
Why were they glorious, or why would you use the word glorious? I don't hear that word very frequently. And I want to honor how you think about that word defining what was going on in the flower shop chapter of your life.
Well, I was well liked in the flower shop, and I was soon given more responsibility. I went on to become an assistant manager in the store that had almost 100 people. I was trained to become a floral designer, and my design team was 3 gay men, a world not known to me, and I loved them, and they were just crazy funny. And
What years, roughly?
I graduated from high school in 1968, so this was 69, 70, 71.
Amazing.
And yes, very different world. And then the husband and wife that ran the shop, they saw my zest for learning. And one summer when I was with them, they used to take me out to what was called the farm, now Gaithersburg, Maryland, all cookie cutter houses.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Very different, very different. Yeah.
And I would be a salesperson, but I would also work with a man who was from Holland, who was their landscape guy. And so why was it glorious? I just kept learning. I learned about flowers. I learned about design. I did some design for the White House. I did design for big weddings. I learned about plants and growing. And there was a small pond out by the farm, and I would go bring my fishing pole sometimes and fish on my lunch hour. So,
and your brother was still alive at that time?
He was,
okay.
And he had tumbled. He had suffered from staying behind through some difficult years that my parents were having, and he got the brunt of that, and he went on to die of a drug overdose. So he had some really difficult years, and I would go home and just implore him to come adventure with me. Come. And he would say, I can't. You don't understand. And so there was a split screen with some of the times. And then I had a spectacular motorcycle accident on my way home to be with friends after being at a bar and having some beers with friends. I went to drive home to meet people there, and I had this crazy motorcycle accident and woke up in the hospital with my friends who found me there. They went to the apartment and then chased down what had happened to me. And it was definitely very frightening, and it stopped my motorcycle riding for a very long time.
And you weren't being super reckless. It was just a little bit of...
I was not being super reckless at all.
Youth kind of probably showing its true colors, right? Like,
well,
late at night, motorcycle, I shouldn't have had a beer, maybe, I don't know, but nothing crazy.
No, and at the end of the day, it was a day that the police weren't always so discerning. It appeared that a car pulled in front of me, and I went over that car.
And they left the scene?
No, no, but they said that I didn't have the light on the motorcycle. Nobody could figure out going backwards.
After the motorcycle is broken up, right? Very difficult after action-wise to figure all that out. Okay, but you were the young kid and you got through.
And
didn't get on the bike right away. Okay.
No, and an interesting dynamic happened. I had dated one wonderful young man in high school, and I was at the point of knowing that was going to come to an end. And the person I went on to marry a few years later was one of the people who came to the hospital. And he, in the midst of, I had a concussion and had to have a little bit of plastic surgery and bruises here and there. It wasn't terrible, I think, because of that one beer. I think it made me more supple on the fly over the car.
That's what people say, loosen you up a little bit.
Yes. But he landed up saying to me that he had also gone to a prep school that year and not gone off to college. So he'd had a further year. And he said...
Like a PG year, as they call it these days, right? Post-grad. Okay.
Yes. And he landed up saying to me, you look beautiful. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I messed up my face a bit here. And a year later or so, we began dating, and I went on to marry him, and it was really a fascinating time.
Was it an easy yes, let's get married, or did you think about it a lot?
No,
It wasn't.
it wasn't. And I remember writing this when I was doing a bit of an autobiographical piece for a sociology class I was taking. And I wrote, I didn't know what else to say. And my teacher, who became quite a good friend after, wrote, well, you could have said no. And I said, and this is crazy, I am a little on the older side now, but no wasn't in the narrative. No, when I was growing up, it wasn't he asked me to marry him and I said, let's wait, or no.
It was yes.
It was, yeah. And
no think abouts. No think abouts.
No, the story was he asked me to marry him and I said yes. And what I realized was I was enjoying my time with him. But in the instant that he asked me, I realized that as that day had gone forward, other people knew. And the party we were walking into was for us. Oh. And it was really overwhelming. And when he asked me, I had this flash that I wasn't ready to get married. And it didn't necessarily have to do with him. Mm-hmm. I just wasn't ready to get married. And I looked at the lights of the house that we had pulled up to. And I realized that, in a sense, the die was cast. And we were engaged for
very different than your college story where you said, I'm not ready, I'm not going. You're not going to push me, you can pay for it.
Yes.
The die wasn't cast there as much. You had space to make a decision and to get an out or to claim the path you wanted in your story, if you will.
It's true. And I've gone back and thought, what was a dynamic that preceded that? I think having the motorcycle accident was much more psychologically frightening I think I imagine myself invincible.
Okay.
And the motorcycle accident, while I didn't have any broken bones, but it really caught me off guard.
Okay.
And I knew I didn't want to ride for a long time. But I think the dynamic of being caught off guard and falling down made me think that I should not be so wild and crazy. And so I went through some years. There was a little interim period of time where I went on to marry Don, and we were engaged traditionally for 2 years. He was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and
wow.
And he had his brother had married a McGovern, so we would go. I was with George McGovern in South Dakota when he was turned down for his election as president. And likewise, when I was with Muffy, I was with a lot of people that were big namesake in D.C. And I have purposely not mentioned that.
Appreciate that. And, sure they do too.
Yes, very big names. And what I saw during those years, I was enamored of the houses and the lifestyle and then not having to worry about money, except that I was also enjoying what I was doing a bit. But I think I kind of caved into the I shoulds. And when I married Don, we spent 2 years in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I disliked it intensely the first year and fell in love with it the second year. Okay. And I remember falling in love with a prairie artist and realizing, again, the beauty sometimes in barren landscapes. And I started venturing there. And then he went to dental school, so we went back to D.C. And it was really fun for me to go back to D.C. and be with my friends at the flower shop and to sort of reinvigorate some of that life. And that's when I started going to school part-time and paying every penny, for what would have been paid for And over the 4 years of his dental school, I was able to get an associate's degree.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed it because
Back to learning.
I was back to learning, and I was taking classes here and there. And I was able to call out a number of them that I was interested in.
Okay.
And those were some fun years. And then I had my daughter during his senior year of dental school. And I also took some graduate courses. I went to Georgetown University. I was just all over the map trying to learn.
Constant adventuring.
Trying to learn.
Yeah.
You know, and then we moved to White River Junction, Vermont from DC for his first job as a dentist.
As a dentist, okay.
And I said to him, I've helped put you through school and done this piecemeal bit for me. I really would like to finish my degree. And therein, in a short story, I landed up at Goddard College. And Goddard...
In Vermont.
Yes. And Goddard changed my life. Goddard changed my life again. Mm-hmm.
So Goddard, for people who don't know, is a very, it's a different school. It has, I would say, like humanistic, psychological vibes, right? Like a very much an existential, almost like a Northern California vibe to it. I would say like a very like Berkeley-ish.
Yeah, that's an excellent description. It's what I loved is it was very student directed. I went to a couple.
That's true too. Yeah.
But the faculty was just very encouraging of students to pick something. What they would say to me is, "What turns you on?"
Yeah,
what
so that's just wild.
On?
You know,
Who does that?
Full disclosure, one of the presidents of Goddard, I knew when he was at Saybrook before he went there, and that sounds so like the way I think about Goddard, right? Mm-hmm. Like that they put the learning and the authorship in the hands of the student, in the minds and hearts of the student, which is very innovative from an educational standpoint, right? We see a little bit of that now, learning in the real world and how that can connect to the institution. But when an institution starts the relationship with like what turns you on, like what was your response to that when you first?
Well,
it's a very different bit, right? Because you thought you had to go to college. You thought you had to say yes to the wedding, right?
Mm-hmm. And yes to the dress.
Yes to the dress. And now a school is saying, well, let me hear your voice.
I wrote a piece about that because I had gone to a couple of other interviews and they were sort of traditional college interviews. And I remember walking into an office and I think it was one of the deans had his feet on the window ledge and there were these beautiful geraniums on the ledge. And it was just the whole thing was just very avant-garde. And I thought, whoa, I think I'm not only liking this, but I feel me kind of coming alive.
Isn't that wild?
Well,
let's just pause on that for a minute, right? When folks are listening to this, I really would invite individuals listening to this episode in particular with you. Can you land on a spot in your life where you felt yourself come alive?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, can you put yourself in that place, in that time with those people? Mm-hmm. And think about what you were doing, saying, and or being invited to consider. Such an important realization.
Mm-hmm.
So fuse lit.
And it's important to say that, as often is the case for all of us, there was a split screen. I knew my marriage was failing. I knew it was going to come to an end. And I had a young child, and I didn't know how. Once again, I was going to navigate that. But Goddard...
Was that a motivation for you a little bit too? I have to, provide or do something that, okay, go.
It was important.
I see you taking off. You're accelerating 0 to 60 like a race car driver. Go.
I knew I was going to have to work.
Okay.
Again.
Okay.
And I'd already worked. Certainly I had never not worked. But I knew that I had a child who I wanted to be present for. It was very complicated. And I also knew I wasn't wearing my heart on my sleeve for my family and others that my marriage was failing.
Okay.
And I knew that I needed to bolster myself from within. And that going to Goddard and the way that Goddard supported me was really helpful. And I might have mentioned to you that Goddard has one of the mantras is all roads lead to Rome. And so when I said I wanted to study, I've been studying a lot of psychology and sociology, I think because of my family and life circumstances.
You have to understand this thing that you were born into
Yes.
and situation that has unfolded. Yes,
Yes.
It sounds like a sensible move.
Why I went to work in mental health too. So I said to a couple of different professors, I'd like to study the psychology of art using photography as the medium. And they said, well, that's a little erudite. Okay. Are you a photographer? And I said, not per se. And finally but I think I have a very good eye. I have a keen eye that's discerning about the world around me. And I know that turns me on. I like that.
Okay.
So this one professor in particular, because you go to different people and present your ideas. And this one professor said, well, he was a filmmaker. I'll take you on, but you must learn how to develop and print your first month. If you want to study the psychology of art using photography, you must do this. And then when you finish your study, you always had to have a presentation. You must have a show and put up your artwork and mat and mount it and frame it and put up your artwork. And in between, you can psychologize it and you can look at women.
Wow.
You can look at, because I said I'm also fascinated by some female photographers that I particularly like. Well, you can do all of that. And I was on campus for 2 weeks and then home for 5.5 months and communicating every 2 weeks with my faculty.
Was this a 3-credit course, or sounds like it's almost like a multiple courses almost like a portfolio of courses where it was like track 1 was psychology of women, track 2 was psychology of art, track 3 was how do you create art through photography?
I was required to interview photographers to go to photo shows so you could say, and that's where all roads lead to Rome. In a sense, what was fascinating was that I loved all the roads that it took me down. Here I am driving down roads for my life.
Wild.
And then I realized that I liked the camera more and more. And
what did you like about the camera? Like you say, more and more. Like what pulled you away from psychosocial to capturing moments? Because that's a still thing, right? It's not movie. It's funny. I remember when video started to take off, people said, what's going to happen to the photographers? They're going to go crazy. Well, you still need those still moments because we even stop a video to be able to say that frame, that moment in this video capture is the moment where people are emoting or joyful or most themselves or the right angle, right light. So like why more and more photography back then for you?
When I am really photographing and not just a grab shot, I take thousands of photos every year on my camera phone now. But I once had $20,000, $30,000 worth of equipment and 30 pounds of it on my back going into jungles and other places. When I take a photo and I take it, the moment goes into my brain. The emotion of what I see, I often feel. And it's one of the reasons I went on, I'm jumping ahead, to become a news photographer. And I stopped taking news, stopped doing that because I didn't want to see what I saw through the lens of some of the news photos. And it was...
So you went from beauty, right? That's sort of like a version of National Geographic as you saw it wherever you were in the world, to it almost like a slideshow in your mind. Remember the wheel, the carousel, the Kodak bit, right? Where it would just, so life moments in the carousel, right? And then you started doing it for work as a news person, and then the view was of things that were not very flattering, or
I didn't want the image of the
Okay.
car accident or the airplane crash in my head.
got
And
it.
once you've seen it, once you've seen the desert flower in bloom, you always remember that after the rainstorm. There's so many pieces of beauty that are in the carousel of my head. And I still carry a few things I saw that I didn't want to see.
Bright side of mountain versus shadow side of mountain.
That's right.
Okay,
right.
got it.
So fast forward to my husband then was struggling with his job, and he actually lost his job 4 months into our being in Vermont, and I was still going to Goddard, and I was really struggling again with what am I going to do? I love parenting, love being with my daughter, love learning, and as he was at a loss for a bit of what he was going to do,
Okay.
I said, I'd like to be back in the Berkshires. I grew up there. I was born in Williamstown. I spent a lot of years in Lenox. I wanted the safety of returning home, in a sense. And it wasn't that I had lifelong friends that I had kept here. I knew some people, certainly, and some relatives. But I felt adrift in White River Junction, Vermont, knowing that, I was probably going to leave this marriage. So we came back here, serendipitous moment. My mother got her second master's degree, and I went to get the newspaper on Spring Street in a store, and a man was selling his dental practice. Doesn't happen.
In Williamstown?
In Williamstown.
Wow.
And I went out to the car and said to my then husband, I don't know whether to say ex, guess what? We're moving to Williamstown and you're buying this dental practice. And he did.
Oh my gosh.
And we moved back here. I decided that I would use the degree in psychology and sociology. Ultimately, I went on to get the degree from Goddard. And I want to just go back for one sec. Goddard will allow you to you do 6 months of study and 2 years if you're going to get the 2-year degree. So that gave me a bachelor's degree. You do 6 months to study something intensely. But you've seen in my conversation that it included learning about the camera, learning about photographers, learning about the history of photography.
Oh, yeah.
So
thank you. I'm almost doing what in the academic circles they call a prior learning assessment, PLA. I can as you're saying these things, I'm like 3 credits. It's like bingo, 6 more credits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Capstone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And by the way, you can also do a experiential learning credit for 6 months. And I did the flower shop and what I learned about flowers and design and business.
Oh, and you mapped it to courses that normally would exist. I get it.
Absolutely. Okay. So we came back here and there were certainly things that I liked about being back in this area. But I ended up getting a part-time job at Northern Berkshire Mental Health. And that was good. I was working with young children. And there was a lot that was good about that. I went on to direct the program that I went to work for. Initially, I went on to become the director of the early intervention program here and be a spokesperson for the Northern Berkshire Mental Health Association.
And this is all, just so the audience understands, this is before you started racing cars.
Oh, yes.
So this is en route to becoming a writer, to then
Yes.
turning into a racer, then turning into a reviewer, who, by the way, I think you've driven over 3,000 cars.
I have driven
correct?
over 3,000
Is
cars.
that
That's
the
correct.
rumor, truth or rumor?
It's
Truth.
3,000 cars at least.
At least. Okay. All right.
Well, and I still get a new one every week for 26 years. And another one
So they
came.
deliver them to your town, I heard. I heard they deliver them to Williamstown, and they big, sort of enclosed trucks sometimes, depending on the type, and they roll it off, and it's a manufacturer's plate, and it's like, who works for GM or Kia or, Ford, right? And it's you doing a review.
I'm in the Hyundai Tucson
Okay,
today. It came this morning.
You like that car, don't you?
I love it. And what went away was the Ford F-150 Lightning electric vehicle.
Okay.
You want to talk about a little bit opposite. But when I came back here and I started to work in mental health and bring my daughter up, and she was only a little less than 2, I I had one of those realizations that now I really knew that my marriage was not going to work and I was sinking. And
What do you mean sinking?
I felt like psychologically I was going down for the third time because our relationship was pretty estranged. And so enough said on that for the moment, but with a lot of respect for my ex who was suffering from depression. And
which, by the way, I believe is linked to that profession or was early on.
Yes.
Right? Because it's a challenge. It was a challenging profession in the 60s and 70s and probably even into the 80s before it became, I would say, more supported.
Yep. And I really admire him. He retired a year or two ago. I admire him for sticking in with it because he admitted, even when he graduated from dental school, that he really wanted to be a carpenter. And I wrote him a note and said, go be a carpenter. I didn't marry you because you were going to be a dentist. Please go be a carpenter. And if he had it to do over again, I'd love to think that he would. But I began to realize that I was really losing myself. And I decided to pick up the camera again. And I called up the newspaper, the Transcript, and said, would you ever use some photographs? And the chief photographer said, come in and get a roll of film. And it's black and white, and bring it back to us when you've shot the roll of film. And my first roll of film this is a little embarrassing to say, or I feel like it's a little self-promoting. My first roll of film that I turned in had 3 photos go to the Associated Press. 3. And they were $25 instead of $5. And a career
was born.
A career was born.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
It's
a really big deal.
It was so important for me.
The AP is like going to CNN, right? It's like, it's hard to even imagine what that was like back then.
It was so exciting. And I was very fortunate to work for a small town daily where there was great excellence with the editors and publisher at that time. Great excellence. The 2 men that I worked under were dogged in their pursuit of accuracy and excellence. So I trained with some really good people. I struggled to write a caption, which we call cut line. I struggled to write a caption. And now I've written 3 books. How does that happen? I mean, they're automotive books, but
right, of course,
but thousands of articles. But I remember telling Stephanie Johnson, who is the arts editor, I had done a photo essay on the Nutcracker, and I did it early in the genre, behind the scenes, like going into the dressing room with the young girls and all of that. And I was just chirping about my excitement. And she said, stop talking and write it right now. And I said, I can't write. And she said, stop it. You are a storyteller. I want you to tell the story that you just told me. I want you to put it on paper and don't leave the newsroom. I want you to.
So she really kind of forced you to.
She forced me.
She forced you.
Yes,
it was a positive force, right? Supportive force.
It was, and it was.
And did you just go pen to paper, typewriter, go?
Yes, and I've learned over the years that when I'm
So when did this happen? What year, roughly? Not to be a stickler on the timeline of your life.
82.
So 82. So 43 years ago.
Correct.
Someone said, write it down. And you're like, And then you're like, fine, I will.
Well, the was, I don't know how to.
Okay.
I really felt I had.
Did you think you had to have a pattern like your
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And I didn't know that the best piece of advice I've given to others occasionally when someone says, how do you write? I'll say, tell the story. And I've written so many thousands of stories now. And when I was just
And the stories, by the way, they may have started locally, but you write for major automotive journals, magazines, publications.
I've written for every
So
automotive publication in the
name some for our non-car buffs and car buffs.
Well, I just had a story published in Popular Science from being at this year's Dakar in Saudi Arabia. And I have written for Consumer Guide, Consumer Reports, but four-wheel and off-road. I started my automotive career at four-wheeler before the world became so popular with four-wheel drive cars being mainstream, SUVs and trucks. And I became an expert in that area. And when we go back to just fill in a couple little things.
Of course.
I wanted to continue adventuring, had no idea where the light would show up at the end of the tunnel because my daughter was young and I then did go through the divorce and I didn't think any adventuring or seeing the world would be possible.
So you thought, no shot. This is my life here. Back at home, I like it. He has the practice and, you know, we can, just, co-raise our daughter here.
And then I became so lonely in my marriage. And I became not only lonely, but I felt that it was really hard to talk about with others and that I disappoint people. And I did. I disappointed some people in my family that I hadn't.
But you're a little bit of a rebel, I mean, my last name is Rebelo, but you were the rebel because you at a time when there wasn't a gap year, you were riding a little 50cc motorcycle scooter around DC. You changed schools your senior year. You said, I'm not going to go to college. I don't learn that way. I don't want to be patterned.
But I had the motorcycle accident.
Back to the accident.
And then I think I did pattern myself, I guess, for that period of time. Is that
pattern to safety? Is it a pattern to safety, a pattern to norm?
I think it was a pattern to norm and that I was too wild. I liked being wild. But
Were you really that wild?
No. Well, maybe.
Okay, I'm just curious. All right, get back to the story, Sue.
I showed up at my first day at Woodrow Wilson with braids and a little motorcycle, and all these girls came running over to me and said, we have a sorority. You want to be in our sorority? And I wasn't.
Wait a minute. Is this the opening of a new Netflix series? Is that because you just described? I mean, that's a really vivid image.
Oh.
You're a storyteller.
Yes.
You're a storyteller. Just right, Sue. Tell the story. Take us there.
Yes.
So that's what your advice provider gave you as counsel. Write the story, and you started writing.
And I just, as you know, and I referenced, came back from Saudi Arabia. I've been to the Dakar maybe 9 times, raced it twice, been a team manager, media manager twice. I had to write a story being with the team that I was writing about after only being with them for 5 days.
Is this the last 2 teams you managed?
No, this was the team that this year, the Polaris Razor side-by-side guys. And I got to interview them and be with them the first 2 days they competed. And then I came back to the U.S. and I had to try to write about this famous rally that I was trying to describe for Popular Science. And I wanted to describe the rally, but I wanted to describe what it was like to be in the middle of Saudi Arabia that people have, until recently, been really afraid of. People thought it was crazy to go there. And the beauty of it and the fascination of their intelligence, like, for instance, having a solar city that I've stayed in and the Red Sea. And
talk about technology and innovation exposure during your journeys, right? Through technology, you've learned how cars evolve, but also how cities evolve.
And life, and seeing Riyadh and high rises and wealth and intelligence,
culture.
That's it's really not even just. But and then right next to it
reminds me of your view when you ended up in DC and you're like, look at these buildings, the architecture.
Yes, very good. And then right next to it, the camel
Oh,
the camel villages, and people along the road riding their camels and camel tents and small camel towns. And I liked them more than the city. I loved to get out
why
into,
is that? Why did you like or do you like them more than the city?
oh, I'm not a city girl. I'm not a traffic girl. It goes back to my
Well,
roots.
you're not a same route person. You're not a normative
It goes
pathway.
it goes back to my roots. It was so rich. It's I like the sights, sounds, and smells of not the city, but places where there's desert air and places where there's
Is it
camel town.
liberation? Is it liberation? Is it liberating to have like this exposure to nature? Like when you're a brother and you would, sort of take off and just go up hills on motorbikes and go fishing and go through the woods and,
It was absolutely delicious. It was just so delicious when I think back to what we did and how close we were. We were just really comfortably close. My mother told us never go into the quarry off of Lime Kiln Road. There was a lime quarry, and do not ever think of swimming in it. And we would go as young kids, and we would take off our clothes and dive in and swim, lie just on the dock and dry off, and then go home and say, nope, no, no, we didn't do that. I mean, very
wild.
very much Norman Rockwell feel for me. I love his art, especially his early art. But back here, when I realized that my marriage was causing me to maybe, it felt psychologically, go down for the third time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did was say, you can come and get me now. I don't necessarily want a divorce. I don't think it's a good thing. It's not going to be a good thing for our family, for our daughter.
Okay.
But I can no longer be the one trying to make this work. And I'd gone to some therapy and tried to figure things out, and that wasn't mutual. I think my ex cared very much, but I think he was not able to make that leap. And so what I finally did, which was helpful for me, was to say, I just can't do this anymore. After a number of years of threatening, and I began to not like myself doing that. But so I'd like to say sometimes to people, sometimes we come to the edge of a cliff, and seldom in life are we going to have two parachutes to jump off the cliff. If you've got one, go. And that was what it felt like.
So that's your sort of mantra. If you have one parachute, just jump.
Yeah.
You've got one. You're not going to have two. Don't, start searching. You're not collecting parachutes.
Right.
You're using one parachute. Mm-hmm. One.
And I came to the edge of that cliff. I knew it was going to be hard on my daughter. It was hard on my family. I was judged, and I was, as was important to be, somewhat private. I didn't, say, oh, feel sorry for me. For a long time, I didn't talk about, I just said I can't do it anymore. And people grew to realize that we were profoundly different people. Okay. And I think, I at one point said to you something about the Russian doll concept of, I not only have allowed myself to take the risk to enjoy different careers that were right for the period of time, but to also be brave enough and to take the risk to realize that maybe I wasn't going to make it if I didn't do something different. And it's very hard, again, when it involves a marriage and it involves a child. But I then spent a couple of years working for the transcript, working for the mental health center, bringing my daughter up. And at that time, I remember thinking, wow, I really want to see the world. And my daughter is young, and I'm enjoying and busy actively parenting. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I was single now. I was a single parent, and I didn't have a lot of money. And that's a place that I like to encourage women especially, but anyone who's in that position, because it's not easy. And those years came faster than I thought they would. And there were a lot of assists. But one of the most dramatic moments, certainly maybe the most dramatic moment really beyond that motorcycle accident, which wasn't even that bad an accident, just stopped me in my tracks, was I developed an autoimmune illness when I was 35. And I knew somehow very quickly that I was really sick and the doctors weren't getting on it.
Were you losing weight or
No.
just not having energy or just being sick with multiple sort of stomach issues?
To be fair, on a Sunday, I developed an upper respiratory illness, and I'm just wasn't then. I mean, before then and now, I'm not a person who gets sick very often.
Okay.
If I do, I'm very, very careful, especially because of this. I'm really a good caretaker for myself, and eventually went to the CDE and found who was studying what I was diagnosed with. But I just started out with an upper respiratory illness, but instantly, or that day, I started to feel, it's a weird thing to say, molecules moving through my body. And I thought, this is strange. And I began to run a fever. I went to the doctor Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I called. And as I've told the story sometimes, I was a single parent woman. And I was told, we're going to put you on penicillin. We're going to put you on more penicillin. A doctor said to me the third night in the middle of the night, and I said, I can't sleep now. I'm in a lot of pain. My body is in pain.
Your whole body?
My whole body started to get joints. I started to get in pain. And this medical doctor said, do you have any bourbon in the house, Sue, and some honey? I want you to take some bourbon and honey, and it'll help you sleep. On Friday, I went to the doctor. And I remember saying to the nurse, I think you're going to have to help me get on the table. I can't climb up. I am so sick. I don't think anyone's getting this. I was not listened to. And so it was Saturday. I was put on more penicillin. Guess what I was allergic to for years?
Oh my gosh, penicillin. Come on.
Oh yeah. High doses, even IV when I landed up in critical care. So I'm trying not to smirch with this.
So 35 years old, you're in complete pain, bodily pain, joints, can't even get on a table at 35. Young person, really. And no one's listening to you. People telling you to drink bourbon and honey, and you say, no way. They're giving you penicillin, you're allergic to it, you're not feeling any better, you're feeling worse. Well, what next? What happened?
The next day, I woke up and I knew I wasn't getting better. And the penicillin dose had been increased. I wasn't allergic then, but I certainly became intolerant.
Appreciate the distinction.
So the next day, I called my mom, I think late day, and I said, Mom, I'm really sick. And I didn't do that with her. I didn't like to worry her. But I said, would you please come and spend the night with me? I'm just really sick and no one is listening to me. And by that point, I got a very swollen wrist, which still has the scar from that having to be drained. I started to get sores on my body. I started sort of measles-like sores. My eyes became very inflamed. And when my mom came, she said, I want to take you to the hospital. And I said, they won't listen to me. No, please, I just need to try to sleep. And I believe it might have been 7 a.m. that I said, I need to go to the hospital immediately. I'm really sick. And by that point, I had sores on my face, on my arms, on my legs. And I was really in a lot of pain. I think my temperature was certainly over 103. I think it hit almost 104. And I got to the emergency room, and the doctor who saw me I remember my mom was reading Woman's Day and in the waiting room, and the doctor took me in and he said, I want you to know that you are critically ill. Do you know that? And I said, thank you. Thank you. And he said, honestly, Sue, I don't even remember how quickly he discerned that. He said, I don't know if we can save you. I think your organs are starting to shut down. And that's what happens with autoimmune illnesses. You know that, right? I mean,
yeah, I do.
Especially more in the past when people got caught
I'm
off
just
guard.
shocked hearing the story that's how advanced it was. You know, my face probably gave away that secret.
Yeah. And I had to go out and tell my mom, and they put me, and I said, Mom, I'm so sorry. My daughter was 9, and I would like to say one thing before I come forward to the hospital experience. I realized during my being in quarantine, because they didn't know what I had, and they thought I had AIDS. And I said, I know, because that was the
sure.
iteration of
time.
And I said, I can tell you, it's not AIDS. And the doctor who was treating me said, I think you have gonorrhea because there's a swelling thing. And I said, it would be toilet seat case. Honestly, it is. I don't. And I got not only misdiagnosed and then he just gave me more penicillin, but I was put in isolation, a quarantine room. I was given an exam, and I remember being in the room and having someone say, everyone needs to be gowned and treat this like contaminated material. And it hurt me so much. I remember, and then I realized over the years that was smart for them, but I was so lonely and so scared.
Well, plus coming into this, your marriage is changing.
Right.
And you relocated, your life has shifted.
Well, and my marriage had ended. And what I realized when I was in that hospital room for 9 days, was that I had been carrying around a backpack of stones. All these high moments, I was carrying around a backpack of emotional stones. My marriage didn't work. There's some people that are, my friends and pleased that I'm taking care of myself. There's some people that have judged me. I don't have a lot of money. There's some things that haven't been fair. I loved my daughter, but am I going to live to see her graduate from high school? And so there I went into isolation, and there were a number of doctors who would come to my door and they would write, they wouldn't come in the room. There was some kind of green sticker on the door, quarantine, or forget what the term was at that time. But, and doctors would say, thank you for letting me look at your patient. Very interesting. And when this was all over, I left the hospital also in a wheelchair, and I didn't work full time for a year, but I became myself in a lot of ways. I started to become myself again, sort of quickly when I survived. But when I was in that hospital room, and my daughter could only come once to see me, which was so painful, I understood. I looked out the window of the North Adams Regional Hospital, and it was a gray November day. And I looked at Mount Greylock, the lobes of the mountain here.
Highest point in the Commonwealth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, I want to see the world before I die. I wanted to see the world. I don't know if I'm going to get out of this hospital bed. And I began to pray, really pray mightily. And I prayed for 2 things: to see my daughter graduate from high school and to see the world before I died. And those saw me through. I remember waking up one time.
And you saw those through.
Yes.
And you saw those through.
Knew?
Who knew? Yeah.
Who knew?
Those are the 2 intentions you set.
They were so pure for me. And the first was to see my daughter graduate from high school. And when I did, I said, oh, please, could I have college? And then she's going to go for a master's. Could I see that too?
Is the addendum to the prayer. when I was praying, I want to add, I was kind of thinking that
Yes.
maybe we could just do an adjustment to that prayer. Can we do that right now?
Yeah. And
the second was to see the world.
And I thought, please, could I see the world before I die? And I literally thought, well, how am I going to do it? I don't have the money. I wonder if I could write stories. I wonder, I don't think there's that much money in travel journalism, and I'm not that. I've been writing a few odds and ends of stories by now and captions. And along came this good fortune at a point where I was healing a couple of years later.
Okay.
Where, and by the way, I was on a steroid for a year. I'm not afraid of steroids. They're kind of my best friend. I carry them when I travel. I haven't been on one for a long time, but they saw me through. But also what I did was realize that I hadn't been taken care of well by the medical system. And I went to the head of the system here and said, I'd like to sue you, but I'm not going to. I don't really have the time or the money, but I'm going to ask you to give me an open door policy to get treated and to find who's studying Sweets syndrome was the name of the, very much like lupus. And I'm going to find out who's studying it. And I found a man in Boston through the CDE. And so I became a very active partner of my healthcare. I've had a few episodes where I've let that slip a little, but I always find that I know myself best. And I partner and I make it clear. I've had a lot of good practitioners, but I make it clear that we're partners. So again,
more advocacy, self-advocacy.
That's right. And then I met Peter McGillivray's mom, who said, my son wants to be a photographer. You're a photographer. Would you look at his work? And he was a senior and going into a senior year of high school. And one thing led to another. And I looked at Peter's work, which I didn't know what to expect, but
how was it?
Stellar. Excellent.
Wow. Amazing eye.
Amazing eye.
Okay.
And I even thought, I thought he might be better at a couple of things than me. I'm learning some things from him. He was so good, and he still is today. But he wanted to be a news photographer. And I said, he was at Mount Greylock, and I would come over to the paper in the morning, drop my daughter at daycare if she was with me. She was also part-time with her dad. And I started giving Peter rides. And
so you helped him out?
I helped him out.
You got him into the business?
I got him into the business. He and I became, he's in many ways a replacement for my brother. We have a sibling relationship to the good, and we can quarrel. It's very fun and funny.
You put on the gloves once in a while?
Yes.
Right.
It's a sibling kind of, it's crazy. But so Peter went off to BU School of Communication.
Okay.
We kept in contact. You're
Through
doing UPI.
Through all the years.
Oh, he'd come back with this girlfriend or that for the first couple of years, and then he brought his now wife. Okay. And I knew instantly that Diane was the one, and ended up going to their wedding, and
wonderful.
Obviously friends with them through today. But Peter went out to California to follow Diane at the end of their college years, and another critical juncture in our story. Instead of, he'd worked for AP and UPI now.
Okay.
Instead of finding a job in news, the editor of Four Wheeler came to him and said, I see that you're on the roster from BU, and would you like a job? And Peter called me and said, I've gone to work for a magazine called Four Wheeler.
Can you even? My gosh.
And it was so bizarre. And he said, go to the Cumberland Farms, find it in the guns and ammo section, which it was.
Next to the Yankee traders and swappers and all that stuff, yeah.
Yes. And now, by the way, you asked me, I've written for the New York Times. I've written for every car magazine in the U.S. and dozens around the world. So that's crazy. It wasn't necessarily my talent. It was what I started to do that opened the door for a lot of stories that people wanted that called from me, and I sold to them. But Pete called me and said this, and I said, you are crazy. There's a giant truck with big tires on the cover. What's happened to you? And a month later, he called me and said the magazine is looking for women to join the test drive team. And I had never been to California. The magazine was in California. And he said, I interviewed with the editor and I said, well, I'm not really a four-wheeler, but I used to ride my motorcycle to the top of the mountain, shut it off. I used to read
This is so good.
And when I was bragging about, I tried to learn what torque was. It took me 5 or 6 years to really learn what torque was. And John said, stop using the words. I don't care. Can you write and can you photograph and can you get along with people? Because those are the key things that will make
those human skills.
That's what will make you part of our team. Don't use words you don't know.
Yeah, don't. Yeah.
And it was brilliant. And I said, well, I used to get my Honda 50 up on the sidewalk during, when there was backups in traffic or whatever. And he said, I think that's wonderful, but don't worry about it. Just come out here. And my first trip to California was magical and a career was born.
Where did you go in California for that trip?
Well, I stayed with Peter and Diane in Pasadena,
okay,
which of course is fascinating. LA itself is Pasadena.
Oh, yeah.
And then we went to Death Valley. And that's when I fell in love with deserts. Death Valley is not aptly named. I took my mom and she said, well, why do they call it that? She was very frightened coming and going on the steep roads.
As a New England elder would be, right? Like Death Valley, this is not what we do here. Yeah.
I love Death Valley. And it was so...
And a career was born.
A career was born. I saw a car go through the air and I was photographing it. And I said, could I get in the car? Could I get in the vehicle? It was a Range Rover, it wasn't a car, it was an SUV. Could I get in it for the ride?
It was a Range Rover.
Yes.
It was one of the special edition ones, I would imagine.
That's right. Yes, It was the 1989 Range Rover that won Four-Wheeler of the Year. And I was on the cover I was a cover girl for Four-Wheeler. In that vehicle, the photograph that they used was me, right seat, and my mouth was O-shaped because I was screaming like, "Wah! What?
I'm alive again.
I'm alive again.
I'm alive again." Thank you, Peter.
And then...
Thank you, prayers.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, prayers.
Right.
And then following that, we went to Big Bear, which is in the mountains of California, and climbed over rocks. And so the second part of the trip was a different type of driving for our fleet of, I think it was 13 vehicles, and testing each one in different conditions. Big Bear, I saw a pine cone in Big Bear that's almost the size of this table. And I just kept learning and finding things so new and different. And Peter and I went to the ocean and he tried to teach me how to use a surfboard or boogie board. It was just, I've already used the word delicious, but it was so delicious and delightful. And I said to the editor,
did you feel free?
Oh, I felt so free. I felt so free. The smell of the desert air, the walking in the dunes and the vistas. I like vistas.
Why does this matter, these experiences, more than money to you? Because you said that to me before we jumped in the vault. You're like, in as many words, you suggested that, money, but experiences, that's a different thing. That's what life's about, kid. That's kind of the vibe. I'm paraphrasing the nonverbal and the verbal just for editing reasons, I guess.
You're absolutely right. I've lived with people that had money and saw that it didn't make them happier. And my father waited for many, many years to inherit money and sadly went through it in less than a year. And he sold his soul to get that money. It was $1 million, and it was in 1980. It was in the late 80s, so it was a lot
of money back in the 80s.
And he went through. He gambled and did some other things, and didn't use it wisely. And so I saw that, and I saw it with some other folks, and and it doesn't save us from death. It's not going to.
Right.
It doesn't.
Right. You realize that yourself.
I did. And I think I sort of I had some help, but I sort of saved myself many times over. But when I started at four-wheeler, and then we can fast forward to pretty much now in 74 countries. But I went to the editor and said, John, I've always wanted to go to Alaska. I have a cousin living there.
So you started advocating for where to go.
And I said,
gosh,
would you buy, I don't have the money to fly to Alaska and spend the time. Would you buy a story from me? If I write a story, I could fly to Alaska. And he said, sure. What's the story? And I said, fly fishing and four-wheeling. And I went on to write Fly Fishing and Four-Wheeling. That was my first story for a car magazine. And then Gull Panning and Four-Wheeling. And I kept going back. I've been to Alaska since 1989. I even had a short stint of living there in a one-room log cabin.
So how many times have you been to Alaska?
Since 1989.
Let me see. Let me count the stories. Four-wheeling and fly fishing, four-wheeling.
Yes. I just made my...
Many stories, many trips.
Stories. And last year I led a recce, sort of an expedition for a man who travels the world training special forces and Secret Service and people of that ilk in four-wheeling. And he wanted me to show him the backcountry of Alaska. Once I started in Alaska, going to Alaska, so I got $500 for my first story. And it was such a crazy adventure. And then I went back the next year. And now I've been to Alaska almost every year, but maybe 2 or 3. I was asked to officiate a wedding 3 years ago, and it meant that I couldn't go.
You've probably been 20 times.
Oh, at least. And many times I had a friend that had moved to Alaska, and she became an Iditarod musher. And I went on training missions with her. And so I used to go up and stay with Gwen in the summer and in the winter, and we would do fishing. I had met her in Vermont, of all things, and we became really good friends here. And then she met a man who is a FedEx pilot who flew out of Anchorage, as many do. That's a big area for going to the Asia Pacific for work. And I just fell in love with Alaska more and more. I've said to people, if I had one place, if I was dying and I had one place that I would go back to, I'd rather spend time with my family or take Eve. I'm taking Eve to Alaska this summer. I just booked that trip.
So Eve is your granddaughter?
Eve is my 11-year-old granddaughter. She'll be 12. And she has...
She's got a little bit of Sue Mead DNA, I think.
She has the zest for adventure. Yeah. She's already asked me to go to Australia and Bora Bora. And I said, where'd you come up with Bora Bora?
Well, I saw that picture that you showed me earlier of her reading a car magazine like more intently than like a comic book or a Harry Potter novel.
Yes.
It was a little unusual. Actually, I think it was the technical brochure.
It was the technical brochure, and she was in a car seat, and she was probably 4 or 5, maybe. She loves cars. She's already gone to 2 auto shows with me. Was mad that I went to one without her after she went to her first one. I've made her write her favorite cars at the second show, and that got published, a little piece.
So cars, Sue, for you, cars, and we may have to do a couple of episodes.
I'm sorry, I've gone so long.
No, this is the place for it. Cars are not just like to be coveted. They're by you. In fact, that's not the case at all. They're springboards and gateways to adventure, right? And to seeing the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like is that fair to say?
I'd love to write a book called Driving for My Life, Inner and Outer Journeys. I've tried to patent that or save that title. But cars have been the way for me to see the world, obviously, to go to 74 countries, to meet so many wonderful people. And, I met Nelson Mandela and interviewed him, and that was crazy. But I often think of the man in Borneo who had one tooth going south and one tooth going north in his mouth. And he saw me with dirty water from the river trying to wash the clothing of my team. Mm-hmm. And he offered me rainwater. And he couldn't speak English,
Oh.
and I couldn't speak Dayak. And he will be one of the favorite characters in my life. We were holed up getting vehicles across a river as part of this Camel Trophy adventure I was on.
Okay.
And he...
Another Range Rover.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Expedition. Yeah.
But not only did he give me clean water to wash my and my colleagues, 3 guys' clothes, but he said I could use his line to dry them in the sun. We had guide wires on the car where I would dry things.
That's right.
Right? And then he did the most magical thing. Again, we didn't speak each other's language, and he went, and he brought me
He gestured for you to come over to him?
Come into his home. And there were a group of people on the floor in the kitchen with newspapers eating fish, picking the bones out of fish and eating fish. And he must have said, "It's my new friend, Sue."
Yeah. Right.
And he took me out to a back deck with slats, and he had what looked like an outhouse, but it did have a little place to go to the bathroom. But he had fresh rainwater, and he had a scrub brush that, and a piece of soap that I think was lye soap. And he gestured that I should take off my clothes and I should go in his shower. And there was a place to do that. So when I talk about what have cars done, and before we close, I really would like to say, I have been given so much, and those answered prayers and many others. Not all my prayers have been answered.
You've got a good batting average, though.
I do.
It's pretty good.
Sometimes I've even thrown myself on my knees at a place where I'll just go to a cushion and say, "Please." But I don't know, the intentionality is there. But I have, because of my mother, I grew up always, I don't feel comfortable if I don't help others. It comes so naturally, and that sounds a little, so I do this. I make meals for people. I dropped off a meal for a family yesterday in South Williamstown. When I'm home, I'm at this point single, so I often will cook big meals. And because I eat out so much and I'm always served, I like to cook and smell food cooking. But
so that's a good practice, big practice for you.
It
is to cook.
Well, to cook and
to give.
To give. And so, speaking of giving and cars, I have responded to Katrina, Joplin, Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, done work in Haiti. I helped build a library. I actually spurred the building of a library by a village in South Africa after I met Nelson Mandela. These things fell into my lap, in a sense, honestly.
Wow.
But I went 5 years after Katrina, and I went with people who had the same skill set that I have. We can bring doctors and nurses in, pull trees out of the road. We can deliver meals. We can deliver medicine.
Now, Sue, what I'm reminded of when I hear parts of your life is that, love isn't said, it's done. Right? Love isn't said, it's done. And love takes a lot of forms, right?
Mm-hmm. And you don't need money for that.
And you don't need money.
You don't need money for that. I just went to my church food bank today, and I get food that I use for cooking meals for people, and I give away food. And it wasn't a good day for me to stop and do that today, honestly. You know that I've had a couple of days where I've been really busy and busy and tough. But I thought, it's really important to do that. I just need to stop and make that happen. And I think giving back and giving gifts. And I think I said to you as we were preparing for this, sometimes I think what goes around comes around. And it doesn't always come from the same person. I look at Peter and we've helped each other. But I think that there's a way of living in this world where I have been blessed, and it's not always with money,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been blessed with so many things and things that I have wanted, the adventures and the travel. From that window, I remember singing "All the Leaves Are Brown" on
Oh, yeah.
that because it was a November day.
Maybe we'll ask you to close with that. You know? But
Yeah.
I do have 3 questions for you
Thank you.
that'll bring us to, I think, a really nice place. And I tend to ask these questions, as we go to wrap up, when we have like that moment where it's like, yeah, wow, this person has given a lot to us in the vault. A lot of treasures have been shared, moments identified, insights like rediscovered, rethought, restated, because I think it helps bring for you and for others and for me a sense of knowing you to life, even more so. So the 3 questions, I'll say them in order, and then we'll go to 1 and then 2 and 3.
Okay.
The first question is, what were you raised for?
Am I going to answer each one individually?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
but I'll give you the second one.
Okay.
Just because I think you'll, like a fuse lit, we'll go 1, 2, 3. But the second question is, what do you want to be known for? And the third question is, what are you doing about it now? So the first one, what were you raised for, Sue Mead? What were you raised for?
I've never thought this, but when you asked me, I immediately thought of the progression of generations. And I had this notion to say something like to carry a torch forward. For me to be the extension of what my mom couldn't do, what my mom did, and what my mom couldn't do. She would have loved to have seen the world, as would my farm girl grandmother. And then to pass that on to my daughter, Brooke, and to pass that on to Eve. And I think I was also raised to be an encourager, even in my climbing mountains and having the other side of the mountain at times, but to find a way to go forward and to encourage others to do that.
Through the magazine images of National Geographic, the chart,
right.
the map, the way forward that Mom showed you. That's what you were raised for. Okay. What do you want to be known for?
It's so funny when you said that. I thought you were going to say, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, you can answer that too if you'd like.
I would like to be known for being a good human being and not giving up. My granddaughter has given me something to put on the bench I'm buying. I've already bought my plot.
Okay.
And she wants me to put on the bench. She traveled the world. And I thought it was a profound short sentence. But what I really want to be known for is caring about others and passing on that passion and being an encourager.
Yeah, that's great. And never giving up.
Never giving up.
Never giving up.
Let me tell you, if you're a desert racer, you can't give up.
Yeah, you're my most famous desert racer, by the way. And then the third, if you want to be known for never giving up and caring for others, what are you doing about it now, even like more recently, or what are you about to do even to really cement and carve out that known for part of what's going to be your legacy, your narrative, your life story?
Well, it first came to mind really encouraging Eve. And certainly Brooke.
Okay.
Brooke is well on her way, and we're in some in-between years where she likes my encouragement. She also wants to be autonomous, and I really appreciate that. But
well, and you lived it too, right?
Yes, yes.
You enjoy the perks of freedom and autonomy.
That's right. But I think in the present,
Yeah.
I want to be known for taking the risk to go to China,
Oh.
for taking the risk to go to Saudi Arabia. When I first went to Saudi Arabia in 2021, people told me that it was dangerous, and it was
What year was it?
2021.
2021. Wow.
And now I've been 5 times,
Wow.
6 times, and I really enjoy the country. I enjoy the people. And now our government's doing business with Saudi Arabia. How crazy is that? And also, it was brave of me to go to China. And I'm hoping to go in the next few weeks.
Wow.
And do some driving training. I've been invited. The Ford
Amazing.
Raptor is being
my gosh.
introduced there. And I've been asked to maybe do some driving training of female journalists. So it wasn't, I have a young man friend, Justin He of China, that I met and encouraged when he was 22 on an expedition that we were co-team members on in Australia. And he enjoyed my encouragement, and he has been my benefactor to go to China. And I've been twice, and I was invited in February. I couldn't make it. I'm hoping to go again. But I think it helps stretch the boundaries for me, and it helps stretch the boundaries for others who think Saudi Arabia or China. And it's not that it's just a far-flung place. It's like, there's the edge of the ocean, like Amelia Earhart. Ooh, I admire so greatly. There's the edge of the ocean. You're going to get on a plane and you're going to go a long way away.
Yeah. There's the edge, and you're going to go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
What I've been taught through this conversation has been that being brave is a difference maker. Brave in seeing yourself for who you are, where you are, how you are. Being brave to raise your hand in a marriage that, needs to evolve into a friendship or a co-parenting relationship. Being brave to write and to go to places and to say, hey, I'll write a story in Alaska. I kind of want to see that. Being brave to even say, I got to tweak this with my daughter a little bit because she's on her way already. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to guide this granddaughter who's saying, let's go. Does she call you grandma or Grammy or something special?
Omi. I am Omi. And I love it.
I like Omi.
I like it.
And it reminds me of the O face you made on the cover of Four Wheel Magazine.
That's right.
That Land Rover. It was a Range Rover.
Yes.
I'm not sure which one it was.
It was
but
a Range Rover Classic.
Range Rover. A classic. 2-door? Or 4?
No, it was a 4-door.
4-door. Okay, cool. Long wheelbase?
Yes.
Okay, LWB.
LWB.
Yeah.
Very good.
So listen, this has been a remarkable conversation. And it goes to show you what bravery can do for yourself and for others. So I'm very appreciative of our budding friendship.
Can I say one more really quick thing? I know we're at the end.
Yeah.
I want people to think about age as not being a barrier. I am 74.
Oh, yes, that's jeez. I forget that.
I forget it. And I guess that, and sometimes people are so startled and they say, no, you're not. But I guess it doesn't have to be over. The learning, the zest, I think I'll go to China. And it doesn't have to be China. It can be anywhere. So I never thought that I'd be working at 74. I never thought that I'd be here.
You were
after
not
30
only working, you're being sought after to work.
Yes.
That's not a push, it's a pull.
Yeah. So don't give up at 50, 60, 70. I don't know where my next days will take me. So.
Ancora imparo is what Michelangelo had written at one point. I think he was in his 80s, which means still I learn. So on that note.
Thank you.
Still I learn. Sue
Mead. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you deeply. Phenomenal conversation. And thanks for teaching us that there are no limits, to pay attention to ourselves, to be brave, and to still learn. Every story matters. I'm convinced. And what matters to you matters to us and to the guests you just heard from. So please drop your insights, realizations, and takeaways in the comment section below. Give us a like, and also maybe even share with a friend or colleague or family member who could benefit from listening to this story. That's it for now. Dr. Dennis Rebelo signing off from my Story Vault.